Audio ready to go? You ready to go? Okay. All right, got a few getting seated. Welcome, come on in. Good morning, RSA.
Good morning.
Gosh, are you awake yet? Good morning, RSA. Good morning. I hope you're just as excited to be here as I am. This is my third year speaking at RSA, and my first year was during the pandemic. So to be back in person, not wearing masks and a lot of the COVID protocols that we went through last year or remote as the year before is super exciting. So welcome to everyone. Excited to kick off the RSA conference and our privacy track. So today we're going to talk about zero trust privacy and what that means and how we can implement zero trust privacy strategies in your organization. So disclaimer, you're going to see this all throughout the conference. It's in all of the slides. That's the RSA disclaimer. So a little bit about me. My name is Dr. Lisa McKee. I have a PhD in cyber defense, and my specialty, my dissertation was in data privacy. So all things that I do is looking at data privacy from a lot of different perspectives, and data being the biggest thing that we talk about. I do a lot of industry work. I work on international standards groups. I work with a lot of universities. I'm also an adjunct. So if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with me. I'm involved in a lot of different things. I thought it'd be super fun. Have you ever done RSA Bingo? Yes, I see lots of head nods. So if you go out to my LinkedIn page, I posted the link to my bingo page, my bingo card. So to make it super fun and exciting, doing a bingo card, zero trust privacy, which will be a lot of the keywords and the buzzwords that we're going to hear throughout the presentation today. So if you haven't checked it out yet, please make sure you do so. It's on my LinkedIn page. So we're going to talk about what is zero trust privacy, the privacy principles around zero trust, data management and data across the organization. And then we're also going to talk about common challenges and how do we get our message through executives when we're struggling to get buy-in from others. So I wanted to start with what is zero trust, just kind of at a high level. This is not a zero trust talk. Like there's other talks here that are going to get all into zero trust. So if you want more details on that, I highly recommend sitting on those sessions. But if you didn't know, Forrester originally came out with the zero trust model. And this is a most recent one that Forrester put out where it talks about the data aspect of zero trust, which is what I want to talk about this session with you. And where does data sit across the organization, and what role does data have when we're looking at implementing solutions and strategies in our organization? So we're going to define the data, do data classifications, data identification, data discovery, and all those fun things that go around the data that leads to a stronger zero trust and privacy solution. So zero trust privacy principles. The whole premise of this is just-in-time access. The right access to the right things at the right time in which it's necessary. So oftentimes what we hear is least privilege, right? We all do least privilege access, at least you should be. And role-based access. Companies are very good at doing role-based access controls. So I'm on the security team or the privacy team, architecture, whatever team you're on, that entire team gets the same level of access. That's role-based access. What's often missed is is down to the individual level. So you have role-based access, least privilege. So what's the least amount of access necessary to do your function? Even though you and your colleagues might all be on the same security team, privacy team, whatever it is you do, that doesn't mean that you all need the same level of access to information. So what we're looking at here is taking it one step further down to an individual. An individual access being, what do you need access to and when do you need that access? So just-in-time access. And there's a lot of different ways that we do this, right? You can open up a ticket when that access is necessary. And then when that access is no longer needed, then you close out the ticket and access is removed. You're going to hear a lot of administrators quibble about this because this is not industry standard today. right? There's a lot of people that have system admin access 24/7 for various reasons. There's even corporate executives and others that have admin access to their laptops. But that's the issue that we run into with zero trust and zero trust privacy is the more people that have access to things, the increase of the risk that you have for the organization. So that's why we want to look at just-in-time access for when it's necessary and what data is needed at that exact moment. So zero trust misconceptions. Zero trust does not mean that you're making something trusted. That is often a misunderstanding. Zero trust is not just about identity. Oftentimes when I work with organizations in the middle of their zero trust journey, they started at identity or they started it at architecture. And we're going to talk about why that doesn't work and why data should be the foundation. So it's not about identity. It's not about architecture solely. Those are components of it, but it's really important to talk about the data. It is not a product. If a vendor, there's a whole vendor floor over in Moscone North and South with lots of vendors that want to sell you all sorts of things. If they tell you they have the solution that will fix all your world's problems, run and run fast. Because there is no such thing as a product that will solve all your world's problems, and especially with zero trust, because zero trust is very complicated. It's not easy, and I'm not here to tell you that it is. I'm going to give it to you like it, straight up, right? We're all adults here. It's not easy. It is a strategy. It is a long-term initiative that you're going to start this journey and get your board and your executives on board. So it's not easy. It is a journey. So when you're on the vendor floor, right, this slide says, our new vendor says, this is a must-have zero trust product. One doesn't exist. It doesn't. You've got products that will help with architecture. There's products that will help with identity and access management. There's other products that will help with your data, but I have yet to find one that does all of that because they don't. They only do their little area of the market. So, and especially ask if they're going to do your policies and procedures, because I love asking that question. I'm like, okay, so are you going to do my policies and procedures too? You solve all my problems, and they just kind of look at you like, well, no, then you're not my be-all solution. So bringing zero trust back to privacy. Currently, we have 6 states, if you're not aware. Iowa was the most recent one that was just signed a couple weeks ago. We now have 6 states in the US that have passed and signed privacy legislation. 5 of them have effective dates over the course of 2023. So if your organization is not talking about privacy, you probably should be, because we have privacy obligations literally coast to coast, from California to Colorado to Vermont and others in between, and Connecticut. The next one that's coming up is Indiana. That one is pending, and that one's going to probably be the seventh privacy state privacy law. Privacy is something that impacts us all. And for me, it's looking at it in a way of not just our customer data, but think of it in the perspective of what if that was my data? There's so many times that I see things that are wrong, controls not in place, just blatant decisions that were made that violate individuals' privacy and present harms. And the first question I usually ask somebody when I see that is, how would you feel if that was your data? And you just get this deep sigh and this blank stare and then the pause. Well, I never thought of it that way. Why not? So you're okay handling your customers' data in that way, but not your own. So it goes back to the ethics of it too. How many are international organizations? Show of hands. Oh, quite a few. Fantastic. So international, there are 100 193 countries in the world. And this map denotes that 71% of those countries, or 137 of 193, that's a lot. Most people don't even know there's that many countries in the world, let alone that 71% of them have privacy regulations. We always talk about the most common ones, GDPR, Brazil, some of the others, Singapore, China, without realizing there's little countries like Morocco and others that also have privacy laws. So when you're doing your zero trust and your privacy programs, one of the most important things to do is to define your compliance obligations. I call that a compliance footprint. A list that has all of the rules and regs and standards that your organization is required to comply with. Companies do a good job of identifying the known knowns. There's the big ones, right? PCI, SOC, HIPAA, maybe ISO, FERPA. We've got them for all the different industries. And organizations do a really good job identifying those big known items. But they're not necessarily identifying everything across the organization. And certainly not internationally of where do you do business and where does that data go. So that's why it's important to understand your compliance footprint in all the places that you do business and all those laws and regs that apply to your company, because the data for all those customers matter. And where that data is going and being sent is going to be critical to the success of our zero trust privacy implementation. So zero trust privacy supports regulatory obligations. This slide is 12 of the core privacy obligations that are in CCPA and GDPR. The boxes shaded in pink or maybe orange or red, depending on what it looks like to you. The darker shaded boxes are those that we can solve and address with zero trust privacy. So zero trust privacy is not your data protection officer. It is not that. But your DPO will be involved in these discussions if you have one. But what it will help with is identifying your data, doing your records of processing activity, which is Article 13 under GDPR, understanding all your processing activities, your ROPAs, your disclosures and privacy notices. Do you have a legal basis for the data in which you're collecting and the actions that you're taking on that data? Consent. Consent is a big one. We see all the cookies and the pop-ups on websites. A click to agree here, right? We got annoyed with them after GDPR. Now we have all these cookies and these pop-ups. How many of you actually read those things? And then you click on it and they're like a page long with words you don't understand, and then you just get so frustrated you either try to find information somewhere else or you just give up and you surrender. Yeah. When we know what data we have and where that data is going and what we're doing with it, we can make those consent and those disclosures easier to read. It shouldn't take a PhD to write them or read them. It shouldn't. So that is why privacy should be an important foundation in the organization. It really sets the tone for what we're doing in compliance and security and technologies across the organization. So when we talk about data, data is everywhere. There's going to be data in systems that are least likely to be expected. And that's the intention of this slide here. We know there's technology systems that are going to have data. We don't always consider our legal and compliance systems. Legal has personal information in a lot of their contracts, subpoenas, and other things that they're doing. Third parties is very important. If you read the Verizon data breach report or the Ponemon report or some of those others, third parties is becoming one of the critical factors in where we're seeing breaches and incidences, especially with cloud providers and misconfigurations. So do you know every single vendor that you do business with, or third party? It might be a vendor, it might be a customer, a supplier. Third party defines it, includes it all. Do you know each and every one of them? Has your organization ever looked at your accounts payables and receivables and compared it back to your third-party management system? That's not generally a common practice, and you'll be very surprised how many companies you find that you're doing business with and sharing data that you probably didn't realize. But those companies are getting paid. You have a contract. Because we all know, right, when third-party management and we're doing contracts, it follows the process, it goes through legal, people sign off on it, and that you should know where that data is going. Another one we tend to forget about is HR. Employee records, which now are coming online with the CPRA, the updated California privacy law that took effect in January, now includes employee and personnel files. Where's that data going, and how is that data being protected, and what are we doing with it? Finance and accounting. We all got here to RSA in San Francisco one way or another. Probably a majority of your companies are paying for that. So you have travel systems, reimbursement accounts, other systems as part of your organization. All of that is data that we have to manage and know where it's going across the organization. And then the last one I want to touch on is software development. Not just production systems, but where is that data going downstream? Your dev, your test, your prod, QA, stage. Depending on the size of your organization, you may have a lot of different ones, as some do. Might be smaller and just have a couple. Are you anonymizing the data in those downstream environments, or is that also real personal information that should be protected? So it's really important when we look at zero trust privacy, the foundation is data. Knowing each and every place where data, personal information resides across the organization, mapping that across the organization, doing your data flows and your data maps and your records of processing activity is going to set the foundation for our zero trust privacy deployments. And when we talk about software development, we also want to be sure that we're looking at APIs. Now, I've been talking about APIs and the data through them for quite a while. When we're looking at procuring vendors, that's one of the most important, or one of the first things that's mentioned. Oh, well, we can connect with an API. We can make implementation easy because we do API hooks, right? We've all heard that. There's a whole bunch on the vendor floor that'll tell you the same thing. But are you asking about the data that's going through that API? Most don't. Most don't even know what that data is. They're just like, oh, well, these systems are connected. Great, made my life easy. But what about the data? And where is that data going? Is that data protected, encrypted, anonymized? Whatever techniques that you're doing to address your privacy obligations to minimize the risk to the organization and the harms to the individual. So it's important that we look at all aspects, even those least likely places where we may not think data resides. This one's funny. If you've ever had to do a DSARS or ever submitted a data subject request, and you get a response and they're like, well, yeah, we have your data and we'll get back to you. Most companies don't know what data they have and where that data is. And they struggle to meet those DSARS time obligations. Here in the United States, with the 6 laws that are passed, generally it's 45 days to respond to a data subject request. In the EU, it's 30 days. If you do business in Brazil, It's 15 days. Now stop and think for a moment. Customer completes a request and says, I want to know what data you have on me, or delete my data, right? There's a lot of different request types. You have 2 weeks to respond and delete all that data or return that data to that customer. Can you do that? Most companies can't. They don't know where all their data is across the organization. They struggle. I have a story to share about when I had to do a data subject request where we were deleting 300,000 records. Say that again, 300,000. That's a lot of data. And this was back in 2018, a company that I was working for doing compliance. And we were terminating a contract with a vendor. They were going bankrupt and no longer in business. And they said, we want you to delete all the customer data that you had. And suddenly it's a frantic. Because you quickly realize the policies that you created to be compliant don't work. When these laws get passed, most organizations are in a frenzy. I gotta do these laws, I gotta do these things, I gotta get policies in place, and I don't have very much time to do it. That's very common. So they're quickly bringing in consultants, they're throwing together policies, maybe not even including the correct people across the organization to check a box and say, we did it. And I see lots of heads and smiles of like, yep, that's my company. But when you actually have to execute on that, and you go back to those policies and procedures, and then you go, oh, yeah, that's not really gonna work for me. So we spent a weekend, in GDPR, you've got 30 days. That's 30 days for the controller, the person that initially obtained the data. We were a processor, we're downstream. So the data's getting passed to us, we are doing financial transactions. We get the request on day 10. I don't get a new 30-day cycle. That 30 days continues regardless of where you are in that 30-day life cycle. So now my company has 10 days to identify these records and figure out what to do with them. Does anybody think it's a good idea to just delete data in a database? I will tell you it is not. But that was the first idea, that was the first comment. I was, oh, we'll just delete this data. I am not a lawyer, full disclosure, I'm not a lawyer. I know a lot about laws and regs, but I am not a lawyer. And I know financial services, we have other regulatory obligations. We have to keep that data for financial services for a minimum of 7 years. So now you're putting on the many hats that we wear as DBAs or developers or wherever your career got started and led you down the path you were on. You have to constantly think of it in all those perspectives and identify what can be done with that data. So we spent the weekend, we got it done, but I started my career off 20 years ago as a developer and a DBA. Never thought 15 years later I'd be looking at database schemas to identify what data we can override. We overrode the data. You shouldn't delete records because you impact the integrity of the data. So know where your data is and know what you're doing with it, and check those policies and procedures. Don't just refresh them annually, but test them. Test the flow of the data. So a zero trust privacy strategy. I keep talking about how data management is the foundation. Most companies are starting in the middle with identity and architecture. But for zero trust privacy, we really need to start with the data. And the reason for that is because if you don't know what data you have, then you don't know where that data is going. How are you going to ensure appropriate access controls and network architecture that enforces and restricts the flow of data, especially those of you that are international, cross borders? Almost every country has some sort of requirements about cross-border data transfers. So we want to ensure that we're monitoring where that data is going, and we do that by knowing what data we have and where that data is across the organization. Once you know your data, then you can start meeting other compliance and security obligations. You can do your asset inventory. Now here, when we talk about asset inventory, we're not just talking about our technologies, it's the data. It's the data element. There are laws on the books today that were signed back as far back as 2016 that require companies to disclose to third parties that they're procuring every data element that they collect. This is a Colorado student data privacy law, signed, I believe it was in 2016. So if you do business with a school in the state of Colorado at any level, as a service provider, you are required to disclose to the data element layer every single piece of data that you collect. Share, store, process, transmit, it doesn't matter. If you have it on a student, you have to disclose that. And disclose what you're doing with that data and the rationale for having that information. Most organizations aren't getting down to the data element layer. But privacy requirements, it's necessary. Because if you don't know the data elements that you have, then your notices are not going to be complete and correct. And the notices are at the category level, so it's taking the data elements and classifying them into categories. So I have name, first name, that's general personal data. You have employee and healthcare information, that's a different category. But you still have bits of elements within that. So that's what we're doing with this, is we're looking at that data layer, classifying that data, tagging that data with the category that it fits. And then we can do our records of processing activity. So if I have my element, I know the category, I have many elements into a business process, that's what you're doing when you're completing a ROPA, a records of processing activity. You're saying, my process is a credit card transaction. And I have a first name, a last name, a credit card number, might have CVV code depending on how the transaction was made, most likely an expiration date, maybe a zip code. We all get gas at the gas pump, right? Most of them ask for your zip code to verify that it's your card. If you physically swipe your card, there's track data when you swipe your card. So each of those are specific data elements within that process of credit card transaction. So that's what we're looking at, is where is all that data going, mapping that out, tagging that, identifying and documenting our records of processing activities. Now we know where the data is and where the data is going. Now we can get into architecture and identity and access management, because I can architect the system exactly as I need it to be. I can restrict the flow of data to zones outside the US or within regions if you're in the EU and you have to restrict data within that region. Now you can force those requirements within your architecture. But if you don't know the data, we're just sending it all over. And we're not necessarily ensuring compliance with those privacy laws and regulations. So that's where data governance comes into play, and that's the next step in the model. So why zero trust privacy? Why is this important? We've spent a lot of time talking about the privacy obligations. Probably, in my perspective, one of the biggest benefits of this is that how much it helps strengthen your privacy program and meet those privacy compliance obligations. But we've also talked about risk to the organization and knowing where that data is going, ensuring role-based access is appropriate for that data, ensuring that data is protected and only sent where it should be sent. So it also helps with risk. Security, the encryption around that data, the protections. And then the last thing being financial. None of us want to be the next headline in the news about a data breach. And unfortunately, we hear about them every day. They're constantly coming up. There's another one, to the point where we're getting numb. But as soon as that's your company, you get back into that frenzy mode again and everybody's scrambling. So you don't want that to be you. So it has a lot of financial impact as well to ensure that you're to be helpful with your compliance obligations and minimize those data breach opportunities. So how do we do this? This is a term that I created called ComproSec, and I actually presented this back in here at RSA in 2021. So this is a mashup of compliance, privacy, and security. We all need to be working together across an organization. Zero trust, privacy, and zero trust privacy cannot be done by one team alone. It is not just a technology problem. It is not just privacy or legal or compliance. Are you including compliance in those discussions? Some do, some don't. But we need to make sure that we're including compliance. In a lot of companies, that's a different department. It's a different function. So when you look for organizational stakeholders, we're also looking at all levels. So not just compliance, privacy, and security, but also communicating this up to the board. So now you need money and you need buy-in to make this happen. We've already said it's not easy. It's a strategy. It's going to take a long time to implement this. So you're going to need board approval, executive leadership buy-in. So we're going to have a top-down approach. We need our executives on board. We need our executives supporting these initiatives. I'm behind you. Let's go make this happen. But you also have that bottom up, because your front level folks are not in those board executive meetings. They're the ones that are going to be implementing these solutions. So it really is a whole team effort from the top down to the bottom up, and we're going to meet in the middle and we're going to execute. So a zero trust privacy implementation plan. How are we going to do this? Define a business strategy. So bring those stakeholders together at various levels. Define your strategy. Understand your compliance obligations. Do your data inventory and your data mapping. Do you know where everything's going? I call this our protect surface. We talk a lot about attack. There's the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Everything can be attacked. But we can't protect everything in the organization. So if we identify, have our strategy, identify our most important systems and applications where this data resides, that's our protect surface. That's our crown jewels, our most super secret stuff that we don't want anyone else to get access to. And we're going to protect and put the most stringent controls around that and protect that protect surface. We're going to design this from the inside out. I know what I have inside. Now I can slowly work my way out to different regions, to vendors, to other third parties, to partners. Where is all this data going once it's in my network? Where are all the spider webs of where it's going? So designing your solution from the inside out so that you know all those places where that information is going, and you can ensure that it's only going where you want it to go. Then we get to identity and access. Who needs access? What do they need access to? And then we'll architect out our design. will build the solution. We'll buy the tools and solutions necessary and partner with other organizations to make it happen. From there, now we get more into maintenance. Inspecting logs, watching traffic, monitor, and maintenance. So this is not easy. Not going to tell you that it is. But it can be done. I've done this at companies. It is a journey, but it can be done. It is possible. So CISA recently came out with their Zero Trust maturity model. Once we have our programs in place, then we can look to mature. And you'll see the last pillar on here is data. It's the whole premise of what we've been talking about today, data and privacy. So your foundational controls, they don't have to be best in class. You'll cripple your program and your organization if you try to do that right out of the door. First layer strategy can be worksheets, can be Excel spreadsheets. A lot of companies do that, especially small to medium companies may still continue to do that, depending on budget and resource constraints. That's okay. It's all about finding what works for your organization. And as we mature our system and our data and our processes, then we can look to advanced techniques, such as anonymization. How are you not just collecting data and maybe encrypting that data, but are you anonymizing it upon receipt of that data, tokenizing that data in some way to protect it? Automation is another higher level maturity activity. You don't have to have automation out of the gate. You can work up to those things. So overcoming challenges, and what are some tips for each of those? So we talked about having a compliance footprint, and I often get asked, but what do we do when there's conflicting laws? And I'd be surprised if there's anyone here that doesn't deal with this, because there's more and more laws, more and more regs, and we're dealing with this more frequently because of that. And the biggest thing is understanding your regulatory landscape. When you understand your landscape and you have your compliance footprint, you know the controls. You know what you're supposed to do. And then it's picking the most stringent set of controls. Also work with legal. I'm not a lawyer. That's what I usually do with my clients. But legal might also know some other ins and outs of what you can do or where you have to comply and where you might be able to maneuver around things. Organization buy-in. It's not easy to go to a board and say, I want to embark on a zero trust privacy journey. But if you show them those financial rewards, the risk that you're solving in doing this, the compliance opportunities and the privacy gains, makes that discussion a lot easier to get board and executive buy-in. You want to build a committee. So we talked about the committee and including compliance, privacy, security, but other teams across the organization. We know data is everywhere. It's even in systems that we probably less likely think it might be. And don't forget about your file shares and your network shares and your Google Drives and all those other network drives and emails, right? Tons of data and files in those. So have a strategy and bring all of those teams together. Unsecured data is often a common challenge in that maybe it's not protected. So knowing what controls you have and what controls you need, know your data, and influence change, culture. Be that change agent for your organization. Be that transformational leader to go to your board to say, we need to do this. There are so many benefits in doing this, and the financial gain as well. It's worth it. So be that voice for your company. So applying what we learned today, the first month, we want to create our cross-functional committee. So bring those team members together. Identify who needs to be part of those conversations. Define your strategy. It's probably going to take 6 months to document your legal and regulatory obligations. Depending on the size of the company, it may not take that long, but generally that's what I see. It actually takes a long time when you start to identify everything. 9 months, identify your protect surface. Where's all the places that you have data, systems, applications, third parties, where that data is going in and out of your network. 12 months, now we're getting to our design and solution architecture. So as I said in the beginning, this is a journey. It is not easy. We're already at 12 months and we're just getting to our architecture. 18 months, roughly, have your Zero Trust Privacy program implemented. And then at the end of the second year, going into monitor and maintenance. So I'll pause here. This is the last one on this slide. I see a lot of folks taking pictures. So the biggest thing to know is that it is a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. Even data mapping and inventory takes a long time. It took 6 months in a company that I worked for that was a global company to do that. So with that, I'm going to leave you with one last thought. Privacy is not dead. It is here to stay. It is inevitable. So if you're not having these conversations right now within your organization, I highly recommend that you start. Go to your manager, go to legal, go to your privacy team, and ask what you're doing. And how can you strengthen those programs and work to get a Zero Trust Privacy program implemented. So with that, I thank you all, and I'll open it for questions. Yes, thank you. Question.
Digital experience monitoring technology seems to be a big trend in the last few years. How do you see, all of that data on users, their location, what they're doing on their endpoints, at least how the system's, working? How should we kind of view that from a privacy standpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, what about all of our other portable devices and digital assets? They all have personal data. Do you have BYOD policies? What's the policies around those personal devices? Are they organizational assets? We know the perimeter is everywhere, right? It's not just at the network layer like it used to be. The idea has changed quite a bit. So you definitely want to include those when you're having your architecture conversations and doing your data mapping and discovery. Ask what applications and systems and devices are out there, and technology will also play a role with that too. So great question. Those should all be included in your scope for sure. Yes. Any other questions?
Question around, most of our environments are like with brownfield, not greenfield. We're not starting from scratch.
Sure.
I kind of drew an analogy to having a building with inhabitants, and then after everybody's living there, using it in a certain way, we're looking to architect. So retroactive architecting is a bit of a challenge. So do you have any insights there?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we retrofit our architecture? Because a lot of companies are already in business and are already doing things today, and that's a great question. So I would go back to your compliance obligations. Do you know what those are? Once you know what those are, then you can define and identify where data can go. And once you know where that data can go, then you look at the current architecture to see if it supports those obligations or what changes are needed. In some cases, it might be okay, but oftentimes I find that organizations have some sort of change that's necessary, especially when it comes to international business and cross-border data transfers. So evaluate what's in place, look at your strategy, and then go from there. Great question. Any other questions? Yes? Yeah, so the question is, what about AI, and what do you do when there's data that changes over time? And we actually see that with systems development, right? The old mantra was, I could collect everything, and I'm gonna code for it now because it's easier to code for it now and figure out what to do with that data later than to go into change management. So a lot of systems, a lot of folks and organizations have more data than necessary. So when we look at AI and those technologies, it's then evaluating the change over time, right? What data are you collecting? What data is necessary? Keeping your pulse on that compliance footprint that I've talked about, because that compliance footprint is gonna constantly change. And the biggest pitfall that I see is that there's no person within the organization responsible for maintaining that compliance footprint. So first identify who within your organization is responsible for monitoring all the laws and regs around your business so that you have the pulse on what's changing. And then where those changes are, working with the teams across the organization, if it's a software change, if it's application technology, and working with those teams so you know where those new data elements are, or in the old way where you're collecting data that's no longer needed. So it goes both ways. Great question. Any other questions? Question?
So in our hospitality field, we have to have data for security and financial and some data, but we also have been told we need to get rid of their data at the same time. So how do we have data and not have data at the same time?
That's a great question. I actually had that discussion yesterday with someone at B-Sides. So the answer to that is your data retention policy. So every organization should and must, I use must kind of lightly, but if you don't have a data retention policy, you really should. That data retention policy is going to define those different classes of data and the retention period in which those can be retained. Once you have that, and going back to that compliance footprint, you also know your legal obligations and where those exceptions are. There's going to be exceptions for financial services. There's going to be exceptions for people that are in bankruptcy or litigation. There's a lot of use cases that fall outside of that, and you have to document all of those. You may not know them at the time, but as they come up, then you want to add them to that register. And it's just constantly evaluating, what can we have, what do we need, what are we doing with it, the legal basis. If you go back to the slide with the 12 privacy obligations, legal basis is a huge one for data privacy. If you don't have a legal basis for having that data, you shouldn't have it. Okay. So that's what you want to bring it back to, is your compliance obligations and those, and then just keep revisiting it. And when you get a data subject request, and the request, whatever it is, delete my data, return my data, whatever, your policies and procedures should also cover that. So when I implemented privacy programs at organizations, when we're identifying all of our data elements, we know as part of that data element record, can this be returned back to the individual? If we have their social security number, that could be detrimental if we return it and then somebody else gets hold of it. Like, we don't know what they're going to do with it. But now if I just tell you that I have your social security number, the risk and the harm potential, now are minimized. So just because you have it doesn't mean you have to delete it unless your policy says so, and doesn't mean you have to return it in a data subject request. So keep revisiting that. Yes, thank you for the question. So we're out of time. Thank you all. Happy Monday. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'll be outside if there's more questions.